Hi, this is Dex, and today what I'm going to be speaking about is why it is that sometimes something seems to have been solved through counseling, through processing, seems to be all gone, fixed, goodbye, and then it returns and then it comes back. Sometimes that happens. There are specific reasons why that happens, and each of these reasons is solvable, and that's what I'm going to be speaking about. This is something that we encounter not infrequently in counseling, particularly in my approach, which I call therapeutic spiritual counseling. Now, the first and I think most prevalent reason is what I call stubbornly held protective attitudes. A stubbornly held protective attitude is something that's born out of fear of something that has been too much to experience, something too devastating. And so we adopt a solution, an attitude that things are going to be a certain way. And sometimes that attitude is that something is always going to be here, or something needs to be here, because maybe it acts as a shield so we don't have to experience something else. In any case, a stubbornly held protective attitude, we can all understand that sort of thing. We see this in people sometimes, where they just stick to the same old idea or attitude about certain things, and it's not particularly helpful or productive, and they can't think through or around it. A fixed idea. But this is a specific type of fixed idea. It holds a condition in place. It says it must remain. And that is the number one reason why sometimes we will see what seems to be a complete and total success, whether you're the client or the counselor. And it's very frustrating when that happens. It's very disappointing. And it might make a person feel like what they're doing is just not going to work. Well, actually, that's not the way I see it. Because what has happened is that occurrence of something appearing to be gone and then coming back is in itself presenting what needs to be processed next. And as I said, the first possibility is a stubbornly held protective attitude. I've spoken about this several times, and how you process a stubbornly held protective attitude. And basically, you need to have the person really rationally examine the attitude, and in doing so, he will need to process the very strongly charged, devastating, overwhelming material that they've been using that attitude to hold off. As soon as you look into this, there's going to be rising to the surface something very intense. And so that needs to be processed, and you kind of jockeying back and forth between that underlying material and the attitude that has been the solution to that material. And it will give way. So that is the first thing that will get in the way when something appears to have been gone and then it comes back. The second thing is what we call the moment of shock. The moment of shock is how L. Ron Hubbard defined it when he discovered this idea, this phenomena, in what he called Professional Auditor's Bulletin number 80 in April 1956. And I'm not going to be quite verbatim here. I'm not going to read from the issue, but basically what he said was that we had this idea of engrams in Dianetics, which is a recording of a traumatic experience, and the effects and feelings and attitudes stay with the person. And current life can be filtered through those attitudes and emotions when that experience and all that it is composed of is triggered in a person. Okay, so out of this came the idea of Dianetics and processing incidents from which these things come, these engrams. And what Hubbard discovered in 1956 was, in his words, more important than what we thought was the most important things about engrams or these traumatic incidents, pain and unconsciousness. But the thing that was more important, he defined as the moment of shock, being that moment that the being realizes that they are being completely overwhelmed by something. But if you just ask a person if they've experienced a moment of shock, it's not necessary to give any such definition. Very often it will come up. And that's the second thing that is the reason why something seems to be gone and then it comes back. Scientology counselors called auditors and people who experience this process called auditing notice many times that an incident will seem to have been processed through these procedures and sessions, and yet the same incidents will come up over and over again. Well, beyond the stubbornly held protective attitude, or aside from that, another cause is this moment of shock, this underlying, very intense energy experience that is often not lifted when processing traumatic incidents called engrams with techniques like Dianetics. There's more to it. It's very intense and it stays with the person. And it requires its own specific technique to process. I know of 4 different people, researchers, practitioners, who developed techniques for processing this moment of shock. One of them is the one that I prefer to use. Not that I necessarily know that it's any better, but I find it to work perfectly well. And it was developed by Alan Walter. Shock handling, he calls it. I've modified it somewhat to make it more effective, because one of the things that wasn't really observed or noticed with the existing shock handling from Alan was there's a point in there where one asks for the length of time of experiencing the shock, the duration of the shock, it's called. Now, what I noticed, and I learn more from observing my clients these days than I do from anything I could read. So I've noticed that there's a manifestation of 2 different durations to a moment of shock. There's the overall length of time of experiencing the effects of the particular moment of shock. And very often, that duration is simply from the point at which it happened right up to present time, right up to now. Sometimes it's less, but often it's that entire length of time ever since. Anyway, so it is helpful to examine and process from the viewpoint of finding that duration. But then there's another duration, which is at least as important and also must be particularly recognized. And that is the duration of the actual inception of the shock. Think of it this way. You stick your finger in a socket or touch a live wire. You're going to be, confused, shaken, disoriented, and feel the sensation of it for a while afterwards. But the actual contact with that live wire, that's the time of the inception of the shock, and that's even more intense. So it helps to have the person process that simply by finding that duration. So anyway, that is the second element. That is the reason why something can seem to be gone, but then it returns. In this case, it'd be more a matter of there's just more to be processed. And then there is a third underlying reason, and this is an attraction to the condition or sensation that's been processed. And this is very interesting. There is a practice by a Dr. Dane here. He calls it access consciousness. And I understand it to be an offshoot of Scientology that Dane here had some involvement with or study of Scientology. And he uses a very simple question to help a person to process an unwanted sensation or condition. He says, what part of that do you love creating exactly as it is? Love creating it. In other words, there is an attraction to sensations of all kinds. There's an underlying attraction. John McMaster was a very important person and researcher and practitioner in Scientology during the 1960s. And he made this discovery when called upon by L. Ron Hubbard, the number one guy of Dianetics and Scientology, around 1965. At that time, what was considered to be the very peak of Scientology processing or counseling, auditing as it's called, the very most highest level, if you think in terms of levels, which I'm not so sure we should, but anyway, it was considered to be the highest level technique in Scientology at that time was something new called power processing. And Ron Hubbard called upon John McMaster, who was his right-hand man, so to speak, at that time, to look into something. What was being noticed was, some people were not making these fantastic gains on power processing, or they were not maintaining them. The material that was being processed was coming back. And so he gave John McMaster the assignment to research and discover why this was and how to resolve it. And in McMaster's words, what he discovered was that we have certain magnetic fields that attract certain sensations or conditions. And another way of saying magnetic fields is attractions, having an attraction for something. And it does bear out through processing that when somebody has some particular unwanted sensation or condition, if you look for it, you can find a little bit of pleasure attached to it in some way. As one of my clients once put it, we all tend to be sensation addicts or sensation junkies. There's a part of us that is attracted to something about this. And that is the third obstacle that will prevent something from being all gone, being gotten rid of. The remaining attraction, which has to be processed in itself. Now, in Scientology, with McMaster's discovery, his means through processing this was what was called search and discovery. And the original search and discovery questions that McMaster came up with, what he noticed about these unwanted sensations or conditions that kept coming back was that there had to be something external to trigger these in us. They were there to be triggered in us, but they needed to be triggered by an external source. So, in other words, this whole mechanism takes place where a person has an attraction for something, despite all the reasons why it's undesirable. And so what we do is we scan the environment and look for a likely personality that can be provoked into intimidating us or threatening us in some way that re-stimulates this unwanted sensation, which could be a physical sensation, terror, could be fear. And so that's the mechanics of it. So the processing question that John McMaster came up with, and this is not verbatim, paraphrasing, but it was something on the order of, what sensation or condition are you seeking to experience through provoking another person to trigger that in you? In Scientology, the word for triggering something is re-stimulating it. But anyway, that was the idea, was that we will find somebody, a likely target in our environment. It's like, poking the bear. We poke that bear, and then we feel the intimidation, the fear, and the physical sensations, whatever they might be. It could be anything, any condition or sensation, sitting there to be triggered by the idea of such a threat, such an intimidation from the environment. And it was a real breakthrough. Unfortunately, in my observation, in my view, unfortunately, Scientology, Ron Hubbard chose to sort of water that down to make the question simply, who is it? Who is the one that re-stimulates these unwanted feelings in you? And then you have to disconnect from that person. You identify that person, and then you must disconnect from that person if you cannot find a way to resolve the relationship so that this game isn't happening of provoking and triggering. And so Scientology very much became about this idea, what he called potential trouble source. The person who was the external point for triggering that unwanted sensation or condition was what Scientology called a suppressive person. And a whole philosophy and system was built around the idea that somebody else is responsible for what we experience, and so we have to be wary of other people and screen them out of our environment when they're quote unquote not good for us, which of course, based on John McMaster's discoveries, is somewhat of a perversion and the watering down of the more basic. We have attractions for something, and so we find a way to get somebody else to trigger them in us. Think about it like being tickled. You can't tickle yourself. You need to get somebody else to tickle you to experience that sensation. For whatever reason, that's how sensations seem to work in this world. So I've developed a specific technique for processing the attractions to unwanted sensations and conditions. Sometimes these attractions are processed with one of these other techniques that I've mentioned. The person recognizes the attraction, but one way or another, this is part of it. And if you don't process out the attraction to the unwanted sensation or condition, then you may separate yourself from the immediate, what you might call the environmental restimulator of that condition. And sooner or later, because the attraction remains, again and again and again, you're going to re-experience this with other people. In Scientology, it's what they call potential trouble source, or PTS. And you'll be doing endless PTS handlings because the environment is so full of suppressive people who will do this to you. I'm being facetious, but that's sort of the indoctrination you wind up getting. That's not the direction I think counseling or processing should take. It should take the direction of empowerment, recognition, understanding, and finding that we create what we experience. We are the source, not anybody else. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, these are the three elements, and the most pronounced of them being the reason why something returns after it seems to have all been eliminated, is the stubbornly held protective attitude. You can simply ask, like I will ask a client when I see this happen. You know, something seems to be all gone, and then not long after that, maybe the next session, they're complaining of experiencing the same thing or similar. So I will simply ask, is there some idea, thought, or attitude you have that says that this condition must persist and must not be gotten rid of? And it doesn't take long for a person to actually come up with a specific attitude and a specific thought and idea that is holding that condition in place, in which case we simply process that. Okay, I have all the techniques for such things, and I'm willing to share them. And again, the other possibility sometimes is that progress is being made towards something, and occasionally somebody may feel, because at the moment of a spiritual liberation, a feeling of release from such a condition, at that moment it may feel like it's all gone, when it is sort of a layer or part of that material, in which case you just need to continue. But generally, when something seems to be all fixed, all gone for good, most likely the reason for that is a stubbornly held protective attitude, thought, attitude, and or idea that says that this condition must continue, that it's in some way protective. Anyway, I will be very happy to share the techniques and answer any questions about this. And if you're getting auditing or counseling, or you have in the past, and you've encountered this, I want you to understand that there's always a solution. There's a specific reason for that, and it really is relatively simple. It can all be solved. And to my fellow practitioners who have encountered this, the same thing. Don't feel frustrated, whether you're the practitioner or whether you're the person who's been getting the counseling or auditing, because that material returning is merely your own spiritual compass presenting the next thing that needs to be addressed, whether it be that stubbornly held protective attitude or one of the other things I've mentioned. So don't be discouraged. See it as the opportunity it is to take on what is now being presented and offered up to be processed. It's all good. And that's it for today. And this is Dex saying, always have fun. And I hope to hear from anybody who'd be interested in learning any more about this. Thank you.